Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Shadow Knows. Yes, welcome to another perfect launch of another perfect show here at the ComicBase Livestream. Hey, thank you everyone who attended our show last week, and hope you enjoyed the trivia. We had a great time doing that with all y'all, and hopefully we'll do it again next week, next year. We've got a couple of technical things, but thank you to all our mods and all the people who helped me pack and ship all the presents. Man, oh man, oh man, did we did we made our mailman miserable with that one? But I hope you guys had a great time with it. Anyway, before we get going here, let's want to say hi to everyone here. Thomas B, you are the first. Congratulations, sir. And by the way, hope, Merry Christmas, everyone, and hope you have a great New Year. Looking forward to it's been an interesting one, and we'll be talking about it on the show today. Fred Slota, great to see you, man. Andre, always a pleasure. Mike Beam, good afternoon from it looks like Vancouver, Washington. I'm glad all the temperatures are starting to moderate for everyone out here. We had a crazy cold last week. Christmas actually got moved over to my place from my mom's place, even though she really desperately wanted to host because all her pipes were frozen. I've heard stories all around the country of similar note. Hopefully, you guys were caught out on the roads because man, travel sounds like it was a bear. And yes, sunny 45 degrees. Robbie Weinberg says, and yes, and we have the last hump day of the year. Brian Stewart. Well, man, our mod is in the house. Greg Hecht, and yes, everything is warming up now. Even Jersey is nice. Brian Price, Oro, greetings from Minneapolis. Where's cold? 37 degrees. That's not half bad. And Bill Yacht, Larry's Library. Welcome everyone. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking a little bit about the year that was, both from the industry perspective, from ComicBase, and looking a little bit at what we expect going ahead, and what we're seeing and maybe not seeing from the world around us. And I'm very much interested in your thoughts. So I was doing show prep for this. One thing that's really struck me is how much I do not feel like we have a reliable source of facts and figures for the comic industry. There's a lot of partial views on things, but I'm getting that people looking around in a dark room trying to describe an elephant. Or a statue, and saying, "Oh, this got a long snout here. It must be an elephant. Got a big leg. Must be a table." I really get that feeling looking at the industry because everyone has like these little so distraught pictures of where things are going, and it's just. I just don't know. So I think the more perspectives we can assemble on the whole thing, the better chance we have of turning the lights on and looking around, seeing how things are going. But yeah, definitely, share your thoughts in the chat, and honestly, we might want to take this discussion up in the forums as well. But yeah, let's get on with it. And all hail the wrench mensch. Oh man, you've got a new nickname there, Greg. All right, good to go. All right. So, oh, and by the way, before we forget, please like and subscribe. I would not be a YouTuber if I'd not at least say yes, melee the like button. And if you like this sort of thing at all, please hit that subscribe button. We'll try to keep it coming to you. And lastly, just because we got to do business over here, do not forget there's the last couple of days of our holiday sale. And yeah, when it's over, it is over, and that's the last sale for a long time. So it feels like it's been going on forever, but no, it's the last couple of days. If you have not upgraded your copy of ComicBase yet or renewed for the new year, please do so now. Save yourself a bunch of money. And if you get it done before the end of the year, then I actually get to put in one year's taxes and not the others. So I'm happy if you guys, if you're on the bubble, please sooner, a little better than later for us. Just saying. But all right. And head on over to comicbase.com to get all the details on the site. It'll be the #1 news item on there. Should be easy to find. Special news item. We are down to our last 5 wireless barcode scanners. So if you are in the market for one of those, grab one now because they're going to be gone. That's not even a question right anymore on those. We're actually getting low on the DX scanners as well. Those surprisingly blew out during the sale. But yeah, if you are interested in getting one of those, grab it sooner rather than later. All right, other things that are going on. So looking back at the year that was, the big news, of course, is ComicBase 2023 came out. And for once, ComicBase 2023 came out not during the last 3 weeks of the year or whatever. We usually get it done just in time for Black Friday. We tried to move our release schedule up this year and try to get a little bit back more into the San Diego Comic-Con kind of time frame that we were on for years and years. But when we stopped exhibiting at Comic-Con, that kind of fell away as a goal for us. And then COVID and other things hit, and it stopped being important at all. But I really do want to get onto more of a fall, late summer kind of release schedule. So The next major version of ComicBase is probably coming. I don't know. I mean, not probably won't be Christmas time next year, but we'll see how that goes. The big things we did this year in terms of the program, number one thing, we rewrote the whole dang thing for 64-bit. So the entire thing now, we got rid of all our 32-bit legacy code, which means no more of the ADO.NET database calls. This had a number of interesting implications to everyone, other than it being an enormous amount of work for us. It helped most people with reporting quite a bit, if you'd been having issues with crystal reporting. But main thing for us is 64-bit enabled us to use the full power of your computer to, you throw it at your, at problems. So in other words, if you have a computer with 8 or 16 or 64 gigs of RAM, you could throw all of it at having massive data sets. And so if you want to, you could just make a query which is like, yeah, show me the records of every single comic book in the database, all in one big list. And that's no longer a hard problem at all. Matter of fact, it's actually kind of trivial for the whole thing now. The new version also significantly faster. We did some very clever things. If I'm going to say so to myself, in terms of list display, we got all tricky and stuff like that. And so we're able to show things that used to take a couple minutes to draw on the screen. Suddenly we were showing in a couple of seconds. Even like 50,000 item lists, show immediately. We had one kind of glitch at the beginning of the release cycle where even though we could show the initial list very quickly, scrolling was it kind of reverted back to the old model. In other words, if you scrolled one screen worth, it would have to draw 16 items all at once, and those hadn't been pre-cached, so they were it felt a little initially, but we even did some clever things to stop that. So we released ComicBase 23.1 later on, which rolled those fixes in, and now the new program just really kind of flies. So if you're checking out or you haven't checked it out, please do. It's a real turnaround from last version in terms of overall speed and capability, and we hope you really enjoy it. Other things that are of note in the new versions this year, we added a new category called newspapers, which was important because, first of all, we have a lot of them now. We have over 2 million newspaper listings going back to the 1700s, which is really cool that you can look into those sorts of things. But it also allowed us to get the newspapers out of the magazine category, because there's definitely people who find newspapers interesting. There's people who do not. And by no longer having them intermixed with where magazines were, because that was the only kind of publication we had that could even address something like a newspaper. Now we have the ability, if you just like comics and comic related things, you can say, hey, just give me comic-y books, magazines, comics themselves. Don't care about the newspapers, and just lose them from my collection. Save yourself a lot of space and the update and so forth. And it's a much more pleasant experience if that's how you do. But anyway, you have more capability to control what sort of collectible types you have in the database now, and hopefully you can tailor the whole thing much more to your liking now. So that was kind of a big deal for us. Other things that don't sound particularly interesting, but are, they're like little things that make a big difference in the end. We add item titles to things so we can deal with things where the actual designation, their issue designation, does not look at all like what it says on the front of the cover. So in other words, 4-Color Comics number 253, probably says Porky Pig on the front of it. So we actually can note that it just, if you search for it as Porky Pig, it comes up as, oh, well, there was an issue of 4-Color Comics, it was Porky Pig. But if unless you know the lore ahead of time, you would never know that this was the semi-named, series called Dell 4-Color Comics, and this was just issue number 253 of it. I'm making up the issue number, so don't cross-check me on that one, but things like that were all over 4-Color Comics and various other places in the comic world. Classics Comics, Dell Movie Giants, etc. They all bear titles like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea on the cover, and civilians, people who don't live comics all day long, they just find this impossible to find in a database, and now we can sort that out and give you another way to locate those. Another thing we did in this version, we added, kind of like from the more general aspect of things, we added the idea of the titles can fall into overall titles. So in other words, just because it's, I keep on going to Harry Potter, but Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is actually book 1 of the Harry Potter series. Prisoner of Azkaban, number 2, and so forth. But you can actually say, find me all the titles, all these separate books, all the separate series that were part of one larger series, and that's actually kind of neat to do, especially as we move more into books. And we'll get into more of what we did in terms of the different collectible media over the year in just a bit. Other things that were interesting, we added sales reporting. So we had integration. We've long had integration with Atomic Avenue on things, but now we make it so that you can actually download your Atomic Avenue sales and other things like that right into the program and analyze, how your sales trends are playing out for you. You see all the list of all the things you've ever sold over the course of using the program, your list of fees, commissions, and so forth, and see that all in one nice place. And along with that, we also added in a brand new API, which is application programmer interface. But it's geek speak for saying there's a way now for other computer programs to talk to ComicBase and the ComicBase servers to query your sales information on your behalf, so that you now can have your own, if you can now generate your own clicks and mortar solution for your own companies. If you want to sell it in your store and also sell on Atomic Avenue and also sell on eBay or whatever else, we now have a way to make it so that your inventory gets properly decremented and the sale gets properly reported, all with a very simple, a couple of calls does the whole work there. And that's something that's free to use as long as you're a ComicBase Pro or better customer. ComicBase Archive similarly also has a feature that we added in that a lot of people have been asking for basically forever, which is to be able to export your data out of the archive edition with pictures and all the necessary things that you can use that to populate your own third-party clicks and mortar sales solution. We added a ComicBase interchange format file, and you can see the help file on the website for all the details on how to use those sorts of things. But these are big architectural changes we made in ComicBase this year, which is why we called ComicBase 23, ComicBase 2023. Its code name was Transformer, not just because we need a cool name to call each new version of the program, but this really was a transformative release for us. It was just, we did a lot of big plumbing type things that enable us to go forward in a really big way for a number of years going forward. So we're real happy about that. We hope you guys are too. And that's kind of the major stuff that we did with ComicBase. Now, let me go back here and let's see here. A lot of comments have been coming in here. Unlimited power. All right, let's see. Where do we start here? My goodness, everyone's. All right, okay, sorry. I'm gonna go back. Okay, so Greg Heck wants to point out, if you're looking for drink recipes from last week's show, be sure to check out the dedicated live stream thread at the ComicBase message boards. And yes, I did post the recipe for the Christmas, the Oreo Christmas, not Oreo Christmas cookie, but the Christmas sugar cookie martini. I posted that one on there as well. And yes, I had a couple of those that day, as people might have noticed. Let's see what else is going on here. Let's see. Hey everyone, Jesse Comics, welcome to the show. And Oro says, oh, wow, come on, scroll, Dan. Yes, he posted for the Quiet Cocktail event from the roll call, and maybe even drink after that. Yeah, there was I still got to try that one. The Quiet Cocktail is inspired by a quiet place. It just looks cool. I will give that a shot, but not today. All right, let's see here. Brian Stewart says, I've excluded newspapers updates so far, but do any of these new index list things like first release or first sale comics, Garfield, etc.? Oh, Farside Comics, etc. I have not seen those in there yet. That would be really interesting. I have not seen that level of detail coming down yet, especially with things like newspapers. A lot of times the indexing will come out very skeletal to start with. It really is just sort of like this number of issues came out, during a certain time frame. They started on this date. This was their cover dates as they went on, and then people will fill in the cover prices as they went on, and then major events, and then it gets more and more detailed until you eventually get to where we are with comic books, where like every issue of Witchblade is practically a novel in terms of its complexity of indexing. But things tend to start out small, but go on as we go. I actually would be really interested if people had known what was the first appearances, as it were, of things like Garfield or The Far Side or Calvin and Hobbes and stuff like that. I just think that's kind of cool. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Okay, all right, and then we have some talk back and forth. Oh, by the way, I did not post our usual notice before the show. Is if you have things that you want me in particular to address during the show, please put them to @ComicBase TV. That way, as I'm watching this, the chat and go scroll by, I know what's just talking amongst yourselves and what was actually meant for me to attempt to get on top of, especially because a lot of you guys know the answers to these things better than I do, especially when people like Stealth are in the house, in which case it's like, oh yeah, right, that's how you do the database stuff. We've always wondered. Anyway, all right, guys, let's move on. All right, so other things that are new. So in terms of ComicBase, the other side of the story, so we talked about a lot of the technical features that we've done this last year. The other side of the story, of course, is the content, because ComicBase isn't just a program for doing your stuff, it's also all the content that goes with it. I had kind of a long call before the show, so I wasn't able to pull all the stats I wanted to for things ahead of time, but I'm going to share some of them with you guys yet. One of the stats I didn't get a chance to pull was our total number of additions, submissions, price changes, and updates, and so forth over the course of things. I will pull that one, and it's going to go out in a newsletter to folks in the next 24 hours. You will see that one. But some of the other things that just in terms of the metrics of how fast things are going, we did over 80,000 submissions, which is to say new issues, changes, price updates, and so forth. We did over 80,000 of them in just the last 7 days. You guys are sending just a phenomenal amount of content. We honestly, my mind is blown. I tried to give myself at least one day off at Christmas time, but I was constantly checking in just to see like this flood of new materials coming in, and it was just like, dang man, I really, one of the things I wanted to pull for the show is like, how does that compare to previous years? Because man, you look around, you chat with the other people in the office, and you're like, you guys remember when it was a really big update when we had over 1,000 changes? That was like, whoa, that was, we thought that would never get to that point. I think we've seen updates now where we've had over 100,000 price changes, content changes, and so forth. So it's just absolutely psychotic how much data is flying by these days, and we're doing our very best to keep up with things. Let's go through a little bit of that right now. I'm going to switch over to the other screen here, and let's do our kind of year in review of this. So this is just some data I pulled aside just to kind of fuel a spreadsheet. If I can get there's my cursor. All right, let's see if I can. I'm going to make this blindingly big, so hopefully everyone can see. So, and by the way, these are the preliminary figures. We have not yet pushed the last update of the year. That's coming either tonight or tomorrow night, depending on how the guys back in California are coming along with things. Again, 80,000 submissions in just the last 7 days, guys. You're trying to kill us. We appreciate it, but you're trying to kill us. All right. I'm going to talk over. Well, actually, I am going to pop myself over the top of some of this one. Hopefully, I won't get in the way of anything important. All right. So, starting on January 1st of this year, we started the year with 3,727 book titles. Remember, we just added books as a category, with ComicBase 2020. Before ComicBase 2020, there were just comics. So whether there was a book, a magazine, or thing like that talked about comic books, if it was listed at all, it was listed under comic books. So all that stuff got pulled out starting at the beginning of ComicBase 2020's release cycle, but we started basically with zero. By the beginning of this last year, we had 3,727 different titles of books listed, 17,061 different book print editions, and combined value. I won't worry about the values too much of these, but one thing that's interesting is to look at the velocity of, just even with something, our smallest category by far, books, is we added 70% more titles, 38% more books themselves, almost doubled the number of titles that we're covering books. Now let's get on to the really, sexy stuff there, comic titles. Well, we already carried quite a few of them just to start with. We had 64,563 different comic titles at the beginning of the year. We added almost 4,000, but because there's so many to start with, it's a mere 6% in growth in the database itself. We added, in the course of just 1 year, we went from 971,000 comic books to 1,050,000, and probably it's going to be a little higher when we get done with the update today. Again, 80,000 submissions, guys, but we added 79,168 new comic entries. And this is just comics, guys. 79,168 of these. Last time I knew how many comics were listed, period, in an Overstreet guide, the number was approximately 80,000. So we added an Overstreet guide worth of comics to a database that already had 11 times that much to start with. Anyway, just psychotic amounts of new content. Now, granted, a lot of these are content is going to be things like foreign titles. It'll be titles that no one's ever heard of before. But even if you're talking about just North American mainstreamy type things, you're still talking tens of thousands of comic books. So crazy amounts of stuff. We're going to talk about the value of this one here in a bit when we get to the industry here. But look at just really briefly. We added basically $18 million in value to the comic listings on the whole things. The question, and we'll get to this one in a minute, is how much of that is represented by the 80,000 new comic books we added, and how much of that is appreciation in the market? All right, we'll get to that question in a minute. All right, now as you guys might remember, magazines and newspapers used to all be merged into one. So whether it was the comic shop news or anything like that, if it was a newspaper and it really belonged in its own category, it was part of magazines before. So even with that, even when the newspapers broken out, we started out and we, basically with 82,740 different magazines listed, we doubled it. We are now up to 166,000 magazines in the database, and the values went up, actually less than you would think, given all that. But that is also with all the newspapers that were in there before moving out, and there were a lot of newspapers that were in there before. Now, we don't have a baseline on newspapers because they weren't their own category before, so that's just count those as zero right now. We're currently at over 2.1 million newspapers listed in the database, and that's going to go up significantly again. You'll even see this week. If you were nominally, and this is an initial guesstimate, to start to try to buy one copy of every of those things, most of them probably do not exist in any format. I mean, good luck finding outside of the Library of Congress a 1791 issue of the Times, but if you were, you'd be looking at something in the order of $26 million. Expect this number to fly around wildly as we start to getting a feel for what the newspaper market, after back issue market, might be. Excuse me a moment, folks. All right. And then the other thing that's really interesting and probably of great interest to all of us right now is the number of pictures. So, and these are primarily comic book pictures. There are some newspapers, some magazine pictures on these, but they're overwhelmingly comic book related pictures. I don't have a separate breakout of purely comic book pictures right now, but as of this morning, we had gone from 793,000 pictures to just under 8,000 on January 1st of this year, to we crossed 900,000. We blew right past it. Honestly, I'm not even going to make a deal about this on the website, for a while, because we've just had too much going on. But at some point, I'm going to make some kind of big hubbub about the fact that we blew past 900,000 pictures on the website. We added 114,614 pictures in 1 year alone. This is nuts, guys. And now you know very much why we needed to release the feature that we did last year, where you can download one smallish set of everything in one archive, as opposed to installing 73 million picture discs in order to get your pictures going. And then the idea with the quick start pictures that we released last year is that you've got instant thumbnails of everything, and the second you interact with any picture in any way, you click on it, you use it on a report, whatever else, the full-size one gets automatically downloaded at the best possible resolution we can give you, and you get it automatically. So that one it was a feature that we released just in time, because I hesitate to think of how hard we would have to squish 907,000 pictures to get them down into any acceptable level of discs. And even as right now, even with the archive edition, I would still tell people with the archive edition, start out by downloading the quick start pictures and let them download on demand, as opposed to simply downloading all 30 gigs of discs at once, because the pictures you'll get will actually be better, because we're just talking about so much content at this point. But we added 14% to our picture library in a single year. The two numbers that stunned me out of this entire thing, other than 2.1 million new newspapers, but the idea we would add 114,000 pictures in a single year, unbelievable. To give you guys a point of reference on that one, the first edition of ComicBase Archive Edition, the one that we sold for $300, right? Because no one had ever seen a DVD release of something with this much pictures on it. That one sold for $299, and it had 55,000 pictures on it. We have twice that many as an update in a single year. Absolutely nuts. At some point, I will try to figure out, if you have 907,000 pictures, give or take, and and what their sizes are, exactly how many hundreds of miles of road you could pave over in comic book, in comic book covers, or some kind of metric which makes some kind of sense in the real world. But right now, words fail. I don't have an idea of how to express what 114,000 new pictures even looks like, much less 907,665. I will say, though, it makes a hell of a good looking screensaver if you ever have those download on your machine. All right, let's look at the more interesting question. Let's look at the values here. All right, so One problem we have as we go through all this stuff is that we're adding content at the same time the market is appreciating, right? So when we have the question of comic value, I say, all right, well, it was worth 60 million, 682,000 at the start of the year, which by the way, pre-COVID, I think the number was something like 35 million. So the comic market has been going geometric, basically. It is done amazingly well as a long-term asset. But anyway, we've added another 79,168 comic books at the same time that the value of one copy of everything in near mint went from 60 million to 78 million. Well, how much of that value increase is the result of the 80,000 new books that we added, and how much of it is a result of just the comics that were in the database becoming more valuable? Well, to attempt to answer this question, and it actually is a surprisingly hard to tease out question, we basically figured out, all right, well, we know that we added 79,168 new comics on things. And I'm gonna, asterisk this a little bit because, you know, there will be things that change names. There will be things that change designations. There will always be little things at the margin which kind of make the data set just a little bit, not exactly matching. But you will get pretty close to the answer you're looking for if you sit there and say, all right, we'll take out the last 79,168 comics you added to the database, and then you'll be back at where you were and on January 1st. Give or take a couple, right? But you're definitely in the right area of things. If you were to do, back out the last, last 79,000 comic books out of the database and roll back and price out in the current day only the ones that existed last year on January 1st, then you're left with this. The same items value comes out to $77,581,000, which you'll notice is really close to the $78,577,000. You're off by $1 million, which is to say the new comic books we added this year were worth about $1 million, those 80,000 comic books, which tells you there were also things like, large issues of foreign comics from the 50s that, for the most part, I mean, lots of variants, lots of things like that, but not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things. What's worth a ton of money? Well, if you got a copy of Marvel Comics #1, it's worth about $3.2 million just for one issue, right? But anyway, those same issues, as near as we can figure, that existed in the database at the start of the year, priced right now, gained in value by $16,899,300, $899,362. So the same, again, let's say you owned one of everything, as it existed in January 1st, you made 16 mil during this year. Which is to say your investment grew, if you owned one of everything, by 27.85%, which is a hell of a return. And I had to check this number about 1 million times because I couldn't quite believe it. But then when I went back further in time, I looked at where things had gone since, say the start of COVID. It's actually, things are slowing down slightly compared to some previous years. So one thing I was unable to determine, because the data set, it does get a little messy, just in terms of, when we do things to, bits of data. I mean, I would prefer if our historical data was in a cleaner format than it is. I'm just going to confess this one, but I did want to try to tease out where the action was. And to me, just from a broad look at the pricing underneath this one, the big movement is overwhelmingly in Golden Age and high-end books. I think all boats rose. I can't find anything that went down. But yeah, the big money was in the big books. So if you had a Marvel #1, if you had an Action #1, you had a Detective 27, you were sitting pretty right now. And honestly, if you can afford to, I'd probably say let it ride. But I'm not a financial advisor, so I'll leave you to it. But yeah, going forward, I am putting some things in place to make it easier to tease out what price points, publishers, and so forth are seeing the biggest sorts of gains, because I think that's interesting. And definitely if we can find a way to kind of throw some of our, because we keep price history of every change to every price, if we can find a way to throw that into a nice data cube for analysis at some point, that'd be a nice project to kind of get some analysis around where some of the particular price action is. But like the rough measures built into ComicBase itself, honestly, it kind of let me down on that one. So I'm I'm looking for a more detailed analysis of some of the other market dynamics on things. But the gross number, at least at the very end of things, is over the course of the year, yeah, market basically picked up 27-28%, and that's, like I say, that's a hell of a steady comic market. All right, let's see what we got going on here. Let's see here. All right, ComicBase. Oh, Alice. Wow, you guys. I've been talking. You guys been talking to. So let me see where I can start the discussion. All right, so I think we got it here with Brian Stewart. Existing ComicBase 2023 comics, they're actually books. Cycle of the Werewolf, an example. Book that is right illustrated. What is the most efficient manner for your team to take input? Most efficient thing to do if you're on our Slack is just send a note in the Slack. If you're not on our Slack, send a note to support@comicbase.com. And I think I figured out how to do this. Let me type this out right now, and I will do it. Let me see. Example banners, rename, delete. Here, create a banner. Here we go. I do not want the example banner. Let's take that one out. So I'm going to write this one out here. This is the thing I wish I knew it existed as a feature in StreamYard before last week. Peace.com. All right, boom. So if you guys write to support at comicbase.com with any of your advanced editorially type questions like that, they will take care of moving things like that around. And also, same thing goes if we got, like, say, a wrong picture for something, or if there's just something complicated about your correction. For regular corrections, the easiest way to go is just make the correction in your own copy of ComicBase, highlight the issues at question, right-click, say submit new or corrected data. We get it, and we can process it very efficiently. But if it's something more involved, it's then just let us know. Support at comicbase.com, and we'll handle it. We'll have an actual human handle it. So, and we'll take care of you there. Okay. Going back to things from the chat. Brent Stewart. By the way, thank you guys so much for putting in the @ for who you're talking to, because that just really helps. Now, if only there was some way I could get that to go bold or something in StreamYard, I'd be so happy. All right, there'll be lots of covers out in the next years. I simply do not have the manpower to process the 60,000 plus covers to submit. All right, guys, you've all been warned. Andre, the king of newspapers over here, was gonna be hitting us here, so watch out. There's gonna be more of those coming. And honestly, we might want to make some adjustments on our back end of just how we bundle up some of the disc updates to try to bundle out things by covers for comics, covers for magazines, and so forth. We never had enough of the things that weren't comics to make it make sense before, but I think it's probably worth putting some effort into as the year goes forward. All right. And let's see here. Okay, Fred says, when a title is moved, spelling, punctuation, etc. What about appending the title description, a statement of the form? Yeah, it could be done. Honestly, it's not a big problem for us if you just send us a note. I don't know if we need to formalize things too much. I mean, just we're pretty chatty. We're happy to just chat with you guys and talk about what's been happening. We don't need to formalize most of the stuff unless it gets to be just unbelievable amounts of content. All right, and Andre's. I think they're talking about Andre's cover catalog, 25,000 pages. Also, Andre has a project where he basically is taking imagine the Gerber books of every comic book's picture all in one big PDF, and that's a thing. It's a thing to behold, and I hope your computer's got a bunch of memory to process it. But that's about it. Okay, I think that's everything I caught from the chat. If I miss anything, someone please ping me out on this one. Again, I'm a little tired today, but I'm doing my best, and I'm trying to keep up with things. Okay, I do see one. Same question for magazines, which I know people challenge on forums. What criteria are specific to break a comic book out into a magazine and index? So the basics of, and there might be a slightly more formal definition that the content guys can give you. The basics of the categories between different things. All right, so comic books is kind of like the Scott Adams / Guinness definition. It's a story told in graphical form by an interposition of words and pictures. So it has to be an innate juxtaposition of words and pictures. It can't just be, here's a bunch of text, here's an illustration, here's a bunch of text, here's an illustration. They have to relate to each other. It's also typically in periodical form, but it need not be. Beyond that, you get into the periodical versus not periodical end of things. So, for periodicals that are primarily news content based, typically publishing less than once, more frequently than once a week, those will typically be covered in newspapers when they're less weekly or better, and typically not news oriented in the same way. Typically, those will go into magazines. When they're non-periodical, then typically you're talking about a book. But that's the basic lines between where things are. Is first of all decide, is it comics in the Scott McCloud / Guinness Book of World Records way of looking at things. And by the way, we care about the Guinness Book of World Records thing because of another possible feature which we've been threatening to throw into the program for a while, but we haven't yet. And I'm not entirely certain why. I felt a little, I don't want to intrude on anyone too much if they don't want to. But one of our customers, many of you guys know, is actually the guy with the world record for the largest comic book collection. And in order to get the Guinness Book of World Records, citation of this one, I got to come over to his house and see his scroll and everything. It's very cool. He has one of the coolest comic book, trophy rooms, I guess I'd call it, that I've ever seen. Vast majority of his books are all in like dense storage out in his garage, but he has one of the nicer, just he kind of arranges his collection along themes, and it's all throughout this beautiful trophy room, and it's just it's beautiful. Anyway, but in order to get the record for the most comic books, the Guinness organization, the same folks who bring you Guinness beer, but also apparently because they're English gentlemen or Irish gentlemen, and they're given to having sporting bets about different things. As they're off doing that sort of thing, someone says, "Well, sir, what would you say the largest this was? Or what would you say the smallest that was?" And they decided, well, we're Guinness, we are men of leisure, and we like doing these sorts of things. Let us form a book and a society of sorts that will set out the rules, and then we shall keep records. And that became the Guinness Book of World Records. So yes, it is the same guys who bring you the beer. But they, in order to figure out who has the world's largest comic book collection, they had to arrive at a definition, like we just did for different things. And one of the things they had to say for biggest comic book collection is, well, it has to again follow the idea of it being a real comic book. Can't just be a book about comic books. Can't be a graphic, an all graphic picture book. It can't just be the Adventures of Spider-Man in prose format. It has to actually be a comic book. You only get to count one. So if I have 32,778 copies of Spawn versus Batman #1, that counts as one for the purposes of enumerating your collection. And various other things like that. So we tried as much as possible to hew to the Guinness definition of what a comic book is, and this is important to us because, among other things, we would like our customer who has the record for that whole thing to have some confidence as to whether his title is intact. But depending on how he's feeling about the whole thing, we're also in a position to release, should we want to, and should people decide they want to, we could release a leaderboard to let everyone know where they stack up in the known rankings of comic collections. So anyway, it's just one of those things that, again, I want to respect everyone's privacy and, make sure everyone, thinks this is fun as opposed to creepy. But that's one of the things that is a potential thing that could be done as long as we adhere to the same sets of definitions of what we're counting. Sorry, that is that. All right, so are we caught up with the chat? Let's see here. I think so. Oh, wait, we got one more. Fred Slota says, Guinness Records, it was meant to rule on bar bets. Exactly. It is sporting bets is what I was thinking of. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a lot of the history of the world is formed by English people with way too much time on their hands. It gave us all the great sports and all sorts of other wonderful things. It gives us things like, what do you call a group of, this sort of animal or that kind of animal? Is it a pod? Is it a flock? Is it a gaggle? A gaggle of geese? Or everyone's favorite, a murder of crows. No one knows what they were thinking when they came up with that one, but yeah, it's literally a bunch of of half-drunk Irish people sitting around in a bar thinking, "What shall we call this, gentlemen?" And anyway, that's history of the world made in ways like this. All right. Let's move on a little bit. So I think we're done with this spreadsheet for now. Like I say, you'll probably see some updates to this one in a bit, but because that is my overhead cam, and which reminds me, we'll also talk about future features, and we'll take it from there. You'll see some final numbers on this one after we push this week's update. And also one thing that I'm always curious about reporting is what was the total number of price changes over the course of the year, and also what was the total number of correction submissions and so forth that we took over the course of a year, because that lets us know how danged hard our not only you guys are working, but also it tells us how danged hard all the editors are working over here at ComicBase. And it's just I'd love to compare that against what I think of as the calmer times when it was merely thousands that would roll in over the course of a week and not tens of thousands. All right. Looking ahead. All right. So, actually, before we do that, let's look behind for just a moment. Um, so, if you guys remember the earlier comic streams, there's a real question came up of, what is the general health of the comic market? And I got to admit, I'm frustrated by this. Not that I'm frustrated with the idea of the comic book market is healthy or not healthy. I'm frustrated by the lack of specificity in the data. Um, when Diamond Comics was in charge of basically the whole world, or even when it was Diamond and Capital, it was pretty easy to get an idea. In those times when like the newsstand market had collapsed, for a number of years, you got a pretty good idea of what the comic sales were of any given moment. You could trust the circulation numbers for the most part, and you knew that a comic that was selling 30,000. At one point, I remember in the '80s, 30,000 was the cutoff mark. Where if your book wasn't selling 30,000 copies a month, it expected to be canceled from Marvel or DC. Now, if you had a book that was selling 30,000 copies a month, you'd be like a runaway, superstar in the comic industry. Um, Anyway, the numbers of for the comic industry have gotten really hard to chase down over the years. Uh, a couple of factors behind this one. The number one is that Diamond is no longer an effective monopoly on things. You're not, if you get your comic books, you're getting it from a number of different places, and not everybody plays by the same rules as far as reporting. And a great many people don't report at all. They don't have to, they're not required to, and so they don't. The newsstands kind of faded away, so you don't need to worry about the publishing statistics on statements of circulation, which I know John Jackson Miller over at Comicron. He's spent basically half his adult life chasing down those before discovering later on that, well, the ones from the 40s and 50s, half of the numbers you couldn't trust whatsoever because they were either destroyed or they were like puffed up by the mob or whatever else. But any number of factors that could make those suspect, even though they were astoundingly high numbers. And now you can't get them because people won't give them to you at all. So then you try to trace all sorts of meta things to give you the numbers that you're looking for as far as how things are going. Book scan is one way of going about it. One of the other factors that's making things hard is a lot of the comic sales, or the things that we're calling comic sales, aren't happening in comic stores anymore. They're not happening on your newsstand anymore, but they're happening in your Barnes and Noble or someplace like that, which then brings in the other factor, which is really tough, which is we're changing the definition of what we refer to as a comic book a lot. And that's the figure that has me the most nervous about this one. Is like I don't personally have a problem with any particular definition. If you want to measure a market, as long as the definition doesn't slide around. If the definition slides around, then everything becomes garbage stats, and that's really tough. I mean, you can kind of take a year as a reset year and then try again, but you have to kind of footnote it and say, well, this was the part where we changed the definition of some metric from this to that, and you better call that one out pretty good in your graphs, otherwise no one can make sense of what you're talking about. So let's have a look here, and this is going up to 2021. This is combined print and digital download sales, and now these are Comicron and ICV2's estimates thereof, and I'll go ahead and zoom these in a bit so a little easier to see. Obviously we got a nice steady-ish growth curve, more or less approximating inflation, things like that. I mean, it's not going anywhere bad, not going anywhere super great, but it's kind of slow up and to the right. We had COVID kicked in around here, which you expect would kick things in the teeth pretty good. And then the estimate going from 2020 to 2021 is that the thing went up by about 2/3. Now, that's curious. You have to say, what happened there that would give you that kind of bump? Now, you could say, well, it's the end of COVID. Okay, well, yeah, but that was the end of COVID, but this was pre-COVID. Nothing like that happened there. So what happened? And I think the cue for what happened is we break down the formats a bit down here. We get kind of a feeling of for the whole thing. The green line is graphic novels. So, you know, a little under 500, a little over 500, bit, like that. And then suddenly, kabwhammo, right? They didn't just, jump up, they spiked up to death. All right. The thing that most of us kind of get concerned about here is the comic books, the floppy editions here. The 32-page features of Amazing Spider-Man, Bruce Wayne, and all those other people that we grew up and care about. And if we were to take a straight line ruler on the whole thing, we had a down year in 2020, makes complete sense here, but we could basically draw a ruler straight across from there to 2021 and barely have that thing ticking up to the right. So that comic book sales kind of not going much anywhere. Digital, if we took it's a line here and the line there, yeah, okay, they're ticking up slightly to the right. And this is another one where there's a judgment call at work with the digital download where the ICV2 and Comicron say they're excluding the quote-unquote all-you-can-eat model, which is funny because that would be almost the only way I'd buy digital comic books. So it's hard to know how much to trust some of the stats on this one. I think it's fair to say the trend line on digital is up and to the right at a modest clip. I don't know whether this number ought to be up or down by 40-50% or not, but it's clearly up and to the right. Digital's not going down, they're going up. That part's fine. The comic book part, I'd say it's not going down. It's certainly up from last year. As an overall market, though, kind of treading water. I mean, it's not huge. The other big story in this breakdown clearly is the graphic novels. All right, well, graphic novels. All right, we like graphic novels. It's just comic books gathered into a big form, right? Not really, because we're not talking here about Killing Joke and The Watchmen and Dark Crisis or things like that. So I mean, those are part of it. But what we're doing with graphic novels is we're lumping in manga. That's the number one thing that clearly is part of it. But we're also lumping in things like The Adventures of Dog Boy and Diary of a Wimpy Kid and things that I'm not sure in years past we would have called comics. Now, by the definition we talked about earlier, I got no problem calling them comics, but I would say be careful because it feels like the definition is changed, and something maybe here you would have called a comic is maybe not the same as the thing you would call here. And I would love to see more discussion on the specifics of this from the folks over at Comicron and ICV2, as in a specific list of what's in, what's out. But in general, in my experience, I gotta say, I approach this graph, especially this huge bump from here to here, with a great deal of let's just say I kind of want to get out my asterisk on that one. I'm not saying anyone's lying. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying anytime I see a figure like that either goes from something to flatlining or goes from something and doubling, unless you've got a really obvious answer to why, I kind of want to say the most obvious reason for it to do that would be because the definition changed. And here I'll just see if the new YouTube wants to ban things. But if you guys want to, we're all looking at data for the unknown virus of unspecified origin over the last 3 years. And one thing I found myself doing over that time was looking at flu rates as reported from different seasons. And one thing that was interesting, in 2020 and 2021 is basically there was no flu. Nobody had the flu at all. Everyone had the flu, to hundreds of thousands every year of, the Republic up until 2020 when no one had the flu. So you're looking at at this thing and you say, well, wait a minute, how did something that everyone gets suddenly become something no one gets according to the graph from the CDC? And the answer was, okay, let's look at the footnotes. And the footnotes all said, all right, well, the diagnosis for the flu isn't necessarily that you tested, that you took a certain test and it came back for influenza strain, blah, blah, blah. No, it was that you were exhibiting flu-like symptoms. And they would specify what the flu-like symptoms were. And the other problem is that on the same year, everyone who was experiencing flu-like symptoms got classed as experiencing the unknown virus of unspecified origin. And so it can't be both things. So if it became the first thing, and let's face it, hospitals got reimbursed quite a bit more for the unknown virus than they did for just, hey, you got the flu. So yeah, the reporting was necessarily if you got one bucket you can stick something into and it's more profitable than the other bucket, don't be surprised when that's the bucket it gets classed into. But yeah, it absolutely flatlined for a year or two, which doesn't happen in the real world. It only happens when you change the metric of measurement. So going back to our bit right down here, when I look at a graph like this, I say, okay, graphic novels are becoming more important, bookstores are becoming more important. That's clear. When I see it do this kind of thing, I'm thinking, something changed about what you're measuring. Anyway, that's my take. Your take may vary, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. So, all right, enough about that, and let's move on. All right, so Ed Billiot says, um, do TPB and omnibuses are count as graphic novels? I feel the sales on those have been on the rise. So far as I understand, Comicron and ICV2's methodology, those do both count as graphic novels for them. ICV2 and Comicron were both talking about whether things had spines as one of their major things as to whether they count them in the graphic novel category. So those would both seem to throw those on there. And yes, I do think that certainly there's a preference in format towards those things. And the other factor you got to look into is that we're talking about here is total dollar sales. We're not talking about unit sales. So if I sell you $125 omnibus for Savage Sword of Conan, that's that's just as good for me as selling you $35 $34 copies of Savage Sword or of Conan the Barbarian. So yeah, I don't doubt that some of these major trends in the market are happening. It's just when I see a move that's that market in 1 year, it puts my antenna up. All right. All right, so I don't see other companies to. Oh, let's see. I've got from Greg says, I think the all-you-can-eat sales have to be excluded because those data are necessarily proprietary, absolutely not available. Could be, but they're estimating other things that are proprietary and not available. So, I don't know. I think on things like this, man, the more transparency you could have about the methodology, the better. Because I think the data is so uncertain in general that I would just want to be clear as hell about where my data comes from and what the limits of that might be and how I might be looking to fix in the future. You could say it's all the secret sauce, but I'm sorry, especially these days, your sauce is secret. I ain't eating it because I don't trust anybody if I can't see where it's coming from. All right. And Steve Dassinger says, part of the reason for the large increase in graphic novel might be a lot of delayed books that are paused development, didn't ship for a year. Could be. I guess I'd expect to see more of a biff between 19 and 20 then. I guess it'll be interesting to see what happens when they come up with their 2022 numbers. But like I say, I'm just saying, to me, smells like a measurement change and not as much or more than a data change. So, we'll to be revisited, I'm sure, as soon as we have some feeling on the 2022 data. All right. But anyway, let's go back to other things. So other things are happening in the market in 2022. So we talked about how the the comic book back issue market, at least as measured by the prices in ComicBase, how that's up significantly, 27% or 28% on a year over year for any collectible. Like I'll take that all day long. I can't get that off any stock I trade. And God knows, my crypto did like the opposite of that times a million this last year. So, yeah, no, I mean, it's the only problem we have with comic books is liquidity. If we could solve that one, we'd have this thing licked. But as far as the overall value of the whole thing going up and to the right, that part's been great. Anyway, but looking at other things, so it looks like the overall new sales market is up. Talk in the there's a saying that says the plural of anecdote is not data, which is true or not. I mean, I'd say it's not really true. And I can graph it and trust it. But if you have enough anecdotes, yeah, I do believe that when there's enough smoke, there's some fire there. Talking to the shop owners that I'm friendly with on the whole thing, and I travel comic shops around the country on a pretty regular basis. The number of new comic sales that are driving comic book stores in particular is minimal. It went from that used to be 50-60% of your shop's sales of where your shop's revenue came from, to it's clearly a much smaller share on average for most shops today. If you just even look at the floor space devoted to new comic sales, it's nothing like. There's lots of other things that comic shops are doing to make money these days, but that's not it. And if you look at the bookstore sections at Barnes and Noble, things like that, I'm very pleased to see that the comic-y section has grown quite a bit. The graphic novel-y section, the ones that we would call graphic novels these days, is about the same size as it always been. The manga section is what's exploded. My guess is that and the things that you and I probably wouldn't have in years past have called comics are where the action's at. And also, don't forget, when you talk about things like children's books or libraries and things like that, if I can take, if a traditional picture book, which would just be considered a book, an illustrated book, if that's the style that's selling one year, that's what I will sell the next year. If I can have something like Dogman or Captain Underpants or Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and just by putting it in kind of the same story, and I just change up into more of a loose comic format instead, it just as a stylistic thing, that's what's going to happen for the next, people who want to become the next smash hit amongst the young reader set. You'll just literally change up what how you lay out the format. It's just as much work to do illustrations side by side with text as it is to draw some word balloons and the whole thing if you're doing that kind of book. So style may also be flipping things into different categories. So I think all number of things, but I think we're beating this one to death. I'm going to move on this one if I can. All right. Let's see here. And Brian Stewart also says transparency is critical for sales data. Otherwise, we'll end up with a lot more aftershock situations where suddenly we have a publisher in the hole and $20 million in books canceled. Thank you so much for the segue on that one. So, talking about the gross numbers, everyone in a position to say is saying the overall comic market sales numbers are great. I know from everything we can tell that the back issue numbers are very healthy, but there's not everything goes in the same direction. Like I say, new comic sales and in comic stores I think are clearly off. I don't. If there's a good counterexample, someone who's really ramped up the amount of floor space they're devoting to new comic sales, man, please throw that data point my way. I'd love to get into it because everything I can see is that is a decreasing emphasis in shop owners. A number of good reasons for it, but it seems to clearly be the trend on the comic book storefront, which tells me the product mix is moving around. Other things that are going, which are negative indications in this field. Aftershock Comics, it's funny, I was looking at their bankruptcy filing, which happened last week, and first thing I found was a news story from 2 weeks ago saying, oh yeah, there's all these creators who are saying, yeah, we're stuffing people, and it's all a big misunderstanding. We had some snafus and accounts payable. Everyone's getting paid. No one's not been paid. It's all good. Followed by a story 3 days later, which says, oh yeah, we're bankrupt, and by the way, here's a long list of people who are not getting paid. And it was tons and tons of comic creators, and as well as unsecured lenders from industrial things, printers. Looks like they owed Comic-Con 17-18 grand for different things, which makes me wonder, because man, when we pay for our booth at Comic-Con, we're always cash on the barrel. Where do you go to get credit from Comic-Con? I guess I hadn't known about that move. But anyway, all the normal things you think of people who get stiffed when companies go out of business. But that was Aftershock this last week. Other things, and I'm not saying I have any inside knowledge on any of this at all, there is a lot of talk on Twitter and thereabouts from creators for Valiant about, I did covers for this guy 6 months ago. I'm still not being paid on the whole thing. It's really screwing up my Christmas. Valiant is getting a lot of stick in the press right now and on the Twitterverse for being late on payments, and I've noticed their solicitations have kind of gone to hell. So I'm not keeping a death poll on the whole thing, but I'm going to say Valiant's not looking particularly healthy to my jaundiced outside eyes right now. And then the other one, which actually really surprised me, because we just mentioned last time, is IDW. Let's see if I can find the graph on this guy. Give me just a second here. So IDW, let me pull it up on the other monitor here. Let's start with the big picture on this guy. And I'm gonna zoom in a little way. So this is basically the 5-year chart for IDW. Starts up around $47, and we're currently trading. I want to say, I think the last share trade on this one was like $1.02. Let me go to the 5-day chart. No, we're at 97 cents for IDW Media Holdings. It is the parent company of IDW. I gotta say, I'm really surprised by this one. It's one of those things where I don't trade in their stock whatsoever, but this is not a great chart. This is the 5-year chart. Now, I'm going to say also, if you look at the all chart, clearly something's going on here because the volume curve starts around 2020 as far as the trading volume. There is trades. I didn't find any notion as to whether or not they were publicly or not publicly traded back then, but clearly they had a big run up, for some reason, and this could just be the way the stock was structured. You guys might know better than I do. But during the time when they were actively traded, they were at the 50-ish range, all the way down there. Even like a year ago, let's go to this here. A year ago, they had fallen all the way down to $2.60, but I'm sorry, this is a bad curve. This is not a curve that looks great. There is, strangely enough, on Yahoo Finance, there's one analyst, a total of one, giving a recommendation on IDW with a target price of $3. So hey, he's bullish, but he is the only analyst of either sort that I could find who had an opinion on where IDW is heading. I'm just saying, man, looking at that overall curve there, I'm feeling better about my crypto. Anyway. But yeah, no, to my knowledge, that I think some of the big hits that they've had have come in that they lost their license to Transformers and GI Joe. I'm not sure in the grand scheme of these things whether losing the license is indicative of the financial problems or it causes the financial problems. I think could be a little of both. By the way, if you guys are following licenses, Titan Books just picked up the license to Conan. And they will be republishing the Conan omnibuses. Anyway, we'll figure that one out. But those are coming out again, and I believe you can solicit them either this month or next if you're of a mind to. The original Savage Sword of Conan's and Conan the Barbarians. Marvel, by the way, on similar note, is also going back to press with remastered versions of their original Marvel masterworks. So get ready for a lot of republished content in the weeks and months ahead. But IDW, yeah, they lost those licenses, and they also, I believe, closed up their board games division. I looked at their last couple of balance sheets, and they're just a money chewing machine right now. I don't find a lot of good news for them at the moment. I think they have put out a lot of good things, and I'd like to see them keep going. But I hope their management team pull something out of the hat, because at the moment it just doesn't look great. All right. Anyway, so let's go back to here. All right, other things from ComicBase TV. Brian Stewart says, IDW is one of those that print most of their books in China. Shipping dates have been jacked up their cash flow. Can't buy a book if you can't get it in my hands. Yeah, that's all true. But let's face it, we've been looking at year-long lead times from China for 3 years now. I've bought everything from windows to garage doors to, I don't know, pallet worth of backing boards and stuff myself from China. It lengthens your flow, but if your flow is still jacked up 5 years in a row, you got something else going wrong. That's at least is my take. I mean, again, it's not helping anything. I'll say that for damn sure. But I think something else is going on that is at the height of problems. All right, and Greg Hecht says, Titan also plans to continue the Savage Sword Omni under this year with editing art restoration by Corey Settlemyer? Not familiar with him, but I hope so. By the way, one of the things I'm actually a little excited about for the reissues of the Marvel Masterworks is they say they're going back to the original scans to do some of that. And one thing you can definitely fault some of the original Masterworks for is they were really, really aggressive about the art retouching, to the point that it just doesn't look like comic book art anymore. It looks like, I don't know, like pen rendered editions of on top of an original comic book. It was almost like a retrace and then colored in with MAC paint. someone with a lighter, more organic touch would be very welcome in my mind. Because if you actually open up an old issue of Avengers, and just imagine, okay, if the paper looked newer, what would this look like? And you compare it to these just aggressively perfect colors on some of the early masterworks. It's like, oh, it's a little jarring to me as a collector. All right, so I think that is that for that. All right, we're getting toward the end here, but I want to kind of like just think ahead just a bit and just get folks thinking on this one because I could use your ideas. Um, so what do we got ahead for ourselves? All right, now obviously we're going to be schlepping content like nobody's business. Um, I plan not for the next year to try to do something as insane as rewriting the entire program in another language again, or redoing all the database calls on all the comic-based programs, support programs, backends, mobile apps, etc. in another language. No, did that once this year, and I'm not going to do that this year again if I can help it because it wasn't all that much fun. I mean, I'm glad where we got, but it was a lot of work, kids. So I would like something that's not quite as arduous if we can do it. Now, the rules for us when we sell ComicBase is it's kind of like it's the same. We try to pull the same magic trick off 30 years in a row. By the way, we have just now celebrated our 30th anniversary of the first sale of ComicBase, where it's a program that we demonstrated in beta format or even dev format over at the WonderCon in Oakland, California. And then later on, someone who had grabbed our contact info looked me up right around Christmas time. I won't give out his name, and said, "Hey, that program, is it done yet? Can I buy one from you?" And God bless, he's still on our customer list. So anyway, thank you very much, and also thank you to the person who just right after that one called me up over the blue and ordered one over the phone. I had to take a set of 6 compacted floppy disks along with our newly printed manual we'd just gotten off from Minuteman Press, bind them all together and put them out in the mail in a comic bag and send them out. And that was ComicBase 1.0. So that was 30 years ago, guys. I cannot believe we've been doing it this long, but it's been a blast. Anyway, things that I am looking forward to doing, that I'm planning on doing initially, that I can say, well, first of all, we're going to be working with them very closely in the next couple months to do some updates to Atomic Avenue, mostly because there's some neat features I want to get in there that I think are just going to make the site a lot more fun in terms of how you buy and sell different things. And that is a ton of work, but I've been wanting to get it done for a while, and I think our opening is right now, and so we're going to pursue that when, as soon as we can. I'll be pushing on that. We will be doing an update to the ComicBase mobile app. At minimum, we'll be supporting our new mobile types on that one. But I am interested in other things that you guys want to see along the way. We do have some little quality of life things we'd like to throw into the program, but other things that you guys would like to see in the mobile end of things, please let us know. We are going to have to decide whether we want to pull the pin on the CGC grading breakdown that we talked about a number of live streams ago, where we had noticed that there are multipliers in ComicBase that we apply to CGC grades, where if you have a book in near mint, on average, it, for instance, is worth about 3.5 times as much in CGC 9.4, which in theory is an equivalent grade. But we have a crap ton of market data which says no, people will not trade you a near mint unslabbed comic book for the same price as the other one. And at the time we did our analysis, we had pretty good numbers as far as what the standard breakdowns were. But since that time, I do feel the market has changed enough that CGC has simply become the table stakes for getting into the game if you want to sell online. If you want to sell more expensive books either at auction or online, and they don't seem to have the same kind of jackpot multipliers attached to them, especially at the high end, as you saw in previous days. So we're going to be rethinking some of the CGC breakdowns in light of that information, and probably going with a split of CGC for high value books and CGC for low value books, so that if a book is inherently valuable, it probably wouldn't, I think you got to recognize that having it slabbed does not give it the same kind of bump in its value as it does if you have a rather ordinary book and it just comes in with a really high CGC grade. We talked about this. We threw some numbers around. We ran some simulations on the whole thing. But at the last minute, this last year, we decided, let's hold back on this one. We got enough stuff going on. We don't need to necessarily rock the boat that hard. But that is something we're looking at for next year. And again, we'd very much like to get your feedback on that, and tell us what you think. I just got a new slew of auction data in from Heritage, which to me also indicates that, yeah, a rethink of the CGC multipliers, especially when we're talking about auction scenarios, definitely needed, because they're just not, they just don't move on auction sites and things like that the way they do on eBay. They just don't have the same kind of effect. All right, and that is pretty much it. On a personal note, as far as what I want to do in the next week or two, I'm going to head down hopefully to Florida, and I'm going to squish my toes in the sand because I don't know about you guys, but it's been working awfully hard the last couple of months here. A lot of late nights, a lot of just 24/7 kind of stuff, and I need some time off. And it looks like we finally got our servers and everything else happy. We haven't had any issues with that for a while, and we got some folks to kind of mind the store while we're gone. And hopefully, I'm gonna get to knock back a margarita or two, and get some sand in my shoes. So that is my plan. I hope you guys have a terrific New Year's plan for yourselves as well. And I think that's about it for us, guys. Thank you, everyone. And again, 30 years, man. We could not have done it without you guys. So thank you. It's been a privilege to be able to do this with you guys. And don't forget about that holiday sale while it's still going on. All right, you guys have a good one. Happy New Year. Bye bye.